Sometimes when I close my eyes, it feels like none of it happened to me. As if I'm not that girl who was sold for a sack of corn and 2 bottles of rum. As if it wasn't my wrists that rubbed against iron shackles. As if it wasn't my name that was forgotten like trampled dust on a doorstep. But then I hear a scream. A woman's scream, torn like ripped fabric. And I realize that's me. My name was Leah. I was born in a deep southern forest where my mother sang me songs and my father led me down paths, teaching me to tell the difference between the whisper of a snake and the rustling of grass. We were not rich, but we were free. Then the white men came. They didn't come like people. They came like wind, tearing leaves from trees, breaking branches, carrying seeds away. They burned our home, took us away. And a few weeks later, I was already in a cage on a ship next to other children whose names I never learned. We all cried. No one spoke. Crying was our language. I was sold in Virginia. Master Harper, lean, gray-haired, always smelling of soap and sweat, said I belonged to him now. He gave me a dress that scratched my skin and told me to smile. Said good girls had it easier. I smiled, even when I wanted to scream. Even when my knees trembled with exhaustion. Every morning began before daylight. We scrubbed floors, cleaned horses, cooked food. The smell of corn porridge soaked into my fingers so deeply that even at night I felt like I was stirring it in a pot again. When the master was in a bad mood, he'd throw the plate against the wall and say the food tastes like the dirt you were born on. And I nodded, because silence is the only armor when you are nothing. But not everything was empty. There was Rosa, a woman of about 40, with thick arms and a scar beneath her eye. She called me, my little one. She knew how to make salve for burns, how to convince a guard to look away when one of us was too tired. Rosa had a laugh like a drum, and when she laughed, I believed that God still watched us, even if through the clouds. One night I woke up to a rustle. Someone was sneaking to the barn. It was Eli, a young man with lightning in his eyes. He whispered that he was running, asked if I would go with him. My heart beat like a trapped bird. I said no. I was a coward. I was afraid they'd catch me, that they'd cut off my ear like they did to a boy a month ago. Eli nodded. He didn't plead. He disappeared into the darkness, like a dream. And in the morning, all we found was the rope that once tied the gate. The master told us to dig a hole. He said if they found Eli, they'd bury him there like a dog. After that, I never slept peacefully again. I looked out the window and wondered, where did you go, Eli? Did you make it? Are you alive? Or are you lying in the grass and no one knows your name? One day the master's son, Nathan, approached me, young, smug, with golden buttons on his vest. He said I was pretty, that my eyes looked like those of an exotic creature. I didn't know what to say. He took my hand. His palm was soft, smelled of leather and wine. I felt fear, deep sticky, the kind that doesn't go away after prayer. I didn't tell Rosa. I was afraid she'd do something foolish. 3 days later, Nathan came at night. He said, "Don't scream, or it'll be worse for you." I didn't scream, but something inside me died. Since then, I haven't looked anyone in the eye. I kept my head low, walked slowly so as not to make noise. I felt the world change, as if the house whispered, as if the sky turned away. One day, Rosa saw the torn sleeves on my dress and approached me. She said nothing. She just placed her hand on my shoulder and whispered, "You're still here, my little one. You're not broken." I didn't believe her, but I remembered it. Sometimes at night I pray, not out loud, inside myself. I ask God, "Do you see us? Do you see our eyes dimming? Why did you give me a body someone sees as a toy? Why did you give me a voice I cannot use?" But then I remember my mother's song, the one she sang while braiding my hair. And in that song, there was light. and I whisper it to myself, as if casting a spell against the pain. There are days when the sun rises, but not for you. It shines, but does not warm. It looks, but does not see. On one of those days, I stood by the well with buckets, and the mistress walked past. She held a small mirror in her hands, decorated with pearls. It fell. I rushed to pick it up, and didn't notice how I spilled water on her shoes. The shoes were white. Now, they looked like earth after rain. She didn't scream. She just turned to the head overseer and quietly said, "Punish." Harshly. An hour later, they took me to the barn. My hands were tied to a beam. I didn't scream when the whip tore across my back. Not because it didn't hurt, just because screaming no longer helped. In that house, no one heard screams. Only obedience. When they brought me back to the barracks, Rosa was there again. She spread some bitter paste on my back that burned more than the wound itself. And I looked at the ceiling and counted the cracks. 7. I remembered them, because that's when I decided I must survive. Not for them. For myself. For that barefoot girl who ran through the leaves in the forest and sang as if the whole world belonged to her. The next morning, I went out earlier than everyone else. I cleaned the kitchen, carried firewood, stayed silent. Silence was my shield. No one punished the silent. They forget about you faster. In the evenings we sat by the barracks. Some whispered prayers, some fingered rosaries, some just stared into nothing. I listened to stories. Old man Mose told of a river beyond which lay freedom, of a city where black men wore suits, where there were schools and newspapers, where no one dared to raise a hand. I didn't believe it, but I listened, because faith is like water. Even if you don't drink it, you want it to be near. Then came the day everything changed. A visit. A new landowner came to the house, Master Harper's nephew. Young, from the north, with glasses and a book in hand. He spoke politely, even to slaves. He looked at me and said, "Can you read?" I shook my head. He smiled and quietly said, "A shame." I didn't know what he meant, but it was the first time someone spoke to me like I was a person. 2 days later, he left, and I felt empty, as if someone reached out a hand and then took it back. I didn't know why I remembered him. Maybe because he didn't look at me like I was meat. Maybe because his voice didn't sound like a sentence. A few weeks passed, and something happened in the house that everyone whispered about for a long time. The mistress found a letter under the master's pillow. The letter had words written by a hand not her own, and a signature, a woman's name, not mine. But the rumor spread that it was one of us, and the questioning began. Each of the girls was taken to the storeroom. The door was shut. They were questioned, threatened. I knew, if you said even one wrong word, you would be sold. Or worse. I was lucky. I stayed silent. I looked at the floor. I repeated one phrase to myself. You are ash. Ash does not speak. Then everything went quiet. Someone was sold. Who, they didn't say. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared into the darkness and thought, how many lives are destroyed by one lie? How many souls are lost because someone wanted to play? But that was the first time I felt something rise inside me. Not anger, not fear, a quiet heat, as if my soul remembered that it wasn't a shadow, that I was not just a body, that I was a story, and if I didn't tell it, no one would ever know. The next morning, I went to the old post near the barn. That's where they always hung scraps of notices, lost scarves, and rusty nails. I took a piece of charcoal, and with a trembling hand drew a sun and a river, and beside it, I wrote, Leah was here, in English. The letters were crooked, but I saw how they trembled with truth. I didn't know who would see it. Maybe no one. Maybe many years later. But it was my voice. my memory, my freedom, even for just 1 second. There are days when the sun rises, but not for you. It shines, but does not warm. It looks, but does not see. On one of those days, I was standing by the well with buckets, and the mistress walked by. She was holding a small mirror decorated with pearls. It fell. I rushed to pick it up, and didn't notice that I had spilled water on her shoes. The shoes were white, and now they looked like earth after rain. She didn't scream. She simply turned to the head overseer and quietly said, "Punish," harshly. An hour later, they took me to the barn. My hands were tied to a beam. I didn't scream when the whip slashed my back. Not because it didn't hurt, just because screaming no longer helped. In that house, no one heard screaming, only obedience. When they brought me back to the barracks, Rosa was there again. She smeared some kind of bitter paste on my back that burned worse than the wound itself. And I stared at the ceiling and counted the cracks. 7. I remembered them, because that's when I decided I had to survive. Not for them, for myself, for that barefoot girl who ran through the leaves in the forest and sang like the whole world belonged to her. The next morning I went out earlier than everyone. I cleaned the kitchen, carried firewood, stayed silent. Silence was my shield. No one punished the silent. They forget you faster. In the evenings we sat by the barracks. Some whispered prayers, some fingered rosaries, some just stared into emptiness. I listened to stories. Old Mose told of a river beyond which there was freedom, of a city where black men wore suits, where there were schools and newspapers, where no one dared to raise a hand. I didn't believe it, but I listened, because faith is like water. Even if you don't drink it, you want it to be near. Then came the day when everything changed. A visit. A new landowner arrived, Master Harper's nephew. Young, from the north, wearing glasses and holding a book. He spoke politely, even to slaves. He looked at me and said, "Can you read?" I shook my head. He smiled and quietly said, "What a pity." I didn't know what he meant, but it was the first time someone spoke to me like a person. 2 days later, he left, and I felt somehow empty, as if someone reached out a hand and then took it back. I didn't know why I remembered him. Maybe because he didn't look at me like meat. Maybe because his voice didn't sound like a sentence. A few weeks passed, and something happened in the house that everyone whispered about for a long time. The mistress found a letter under the master's pillow. The letter had words not written in her hand, and a signature, a woman's name, not mine. But rumors spread that it was one of us, and the interrogations began. Each girl was taken into the storeroom. The door closed. They questioned, threatened. I knew, if you said even one wrong word, you would be sold. Or worse. I was lucky. I stayed silent. I looked at the floor. I repeated one phrase to myself. You are Ash. Ash does not speak. Then everything went quiet. Someone was sold. Who, they didn't say. That night I didn't sleep. I stared into the darkness and thought, how many lives are broken by one lie? How many souls are lost because someone decided to play? But that night, for the first time, I felt something rise inside me. Not anger, not fear, a quiet heat, as if my soul remembered that it was not a shadow, that I was not just a body, that I was a story, and if I didn't tell it, no one would ever know. The next morning I walked to the old post near the barn. They always hung scraps of announcements there, lost scarves and rusty nails. I took a piece of charcoal and, with a trembling hand, drew a sun and a river, and next to it I wrote, Leah was here, in English. The letters were crooked, but I saw how they trembled with truth. I didn't know who would see it. Maybe no one. Maybe many years later. But it was my voice. my memory, my freedom, even for just 1 second. After that writing on the wall, something inside me changed. I didn't become bold. I didn't become free. But I became real, as if I was alive again. A small corner of the soul that had been hiding all this time suddenly opened its eyes. No one noticed, or maybe they pretended not to. One of the overseers passed by, glanced at the board, and just spat. Maybe he didn't read it. Maybe he didn't understand. But I felt I had left a mark. Not ash, but something that wouldn't wash away with the rain. A few days later, I saw Nathan again. He was walking across the yard in a new shirt with a ribbon in his hand. He turned, saw me, and stopped. He came close. Too close. I didn't move. He held out the ribbon and said, "I like you, Leah. Take it." I looked at him, directly, without fear, and I said, "I am not a toy." For the first time I said it aloud. My voice trembled, but it sounded. He froze. His eyes narrowed. He threw the ribbon at my feet and left without a word. I waited for punishment. I didn't sleep for 3 nights, but it never came. And then I understood. Sometimes words are stronger than we think. Sometimes they frighten those who are used to being strong. Sometimes they give you a new name. One evening, as the sun was setting and everything looked drawn in charcoal, a girl came to us. Small, about 7 years old. She had just been bought. There was dried blood on her cheek. In her hands, a rag doll. She sat down next to me and said nothing. I asked, "What's your name?" She answered, "I'm nobody." I took her little hand in mine and said, "Now you are Essie." She nodded. Nothing more. But in her eyes, something lit up. Very quiet, but alive. Essie became a shadow beside me. She repeated my movements, whispered the same prayers, memorized smells. We gathered herbs together for Rosa, carried water, shared the last crust of bread. Sometimes I sang her that same song, about the house in the forest, about the path that leads to the river. She didn't understand the words, but she listened as if it were a spell. One night Essie woke up from a scream. She cried, shook. I held her and whispered, "You are here. Do you hear? Here. This won't last forever." She whispered back, "When will it end?" I didn't know, but I said, "Someday. Someday it will." And then, for the first time, I thought, maybe I'm not just Leah. Maybe I'm a bridge between pain and hope, between yesterday and tomorrow. A couple of weeks later, the news came. Master Harper was gravely ill. The house fell into a bustle. A doctor was called. The master's wife walked like a shadow. Everyone spoke in hushed voices. Everyone waited. One night, as I carried water, I heard the mistress arguing with someone in the room. Her voice was sharp. She was crying. Then suddenly, silence. The kind that rings. In the morning they said, the master had died. We didn't know what that meant for us. But everything changed. The new master, his brother, arrived a week later. He was different. Not cruel, but cold. His face was like marble. Without anger. Without pity. He ordered part of the slaves to be sold to cover debts. We were lined up in the yard like merchandise. I held Essie's hand. My heart beat as if it wanted to escape. And when the buyer came, a fat man in a dusty hat, I knew he would choose her. She was young, strong, obedient. He pointed at her with his finger. "That one," he said. I stepped in front of him, shielded Essie with my body. He frowned, tried to push me aside. But then old Mose stepped up. He was coughing, swaying, but he stood beside me. Then Rosa came. Then 2 more. We stood like a wall, silent, but firm. The new master looked at us, said, "What nonsense is this?" but then suddenly changed his mind. Fine, leave the girl, he snapped and walked away. I didn't know why he backed down. Maybe he didn't want a scene. Maybe, for the first time, he saw that even the dust beneath his feet could rise up into a storm. I only knew one thing. That day we won. For one evening. For one soul. After that day when we didn't let them take Essie, I realized we weren't so weak after all. We might be bound in chains, but the soul, it is not tied. It walks, it flies, it watches from above, waiting for its time. Sometimes you can't see it, like it's trampled in the dirt, but if you call it, it will answer. Essie began to smile. Not often, but truly. She found her voice. Small, timid, but no longer a whisper. She sang when she thought no one could hear. Her voice was thin, but pure, like a spring. And I knew, if they didn't break her, she would survive. Not just in body, but in heart. But slave life doesn't like joy. For every smile, the whip. For every glance to the side, a scolding. And one day, she was noticed. She stood by the window too long, watching the white children play ball. The overseer came, grabbed her by the braid, struck her. I ran, grabbed his arm. Then he hit me too. Hard. I fell. The ground was firm. Dust in my teeth. But I got back up. He raised his hand again, and then, as if something stopped him. Maybe a look. Maybe God. I don't know. He stepped back, spat, and walked away. I sat on the ground, holding Essie. Her shoulder trembled, and I looked at the sky. It was, as always, blue, beautiful, indifferent, and I whispered, Lord, you see this, don't you? You're not blind. You haven't forgotten us. And in reply, only wind. The next day, Mose brought me an old, tattered Bible. No cover, torn pages. He said, learn, girl. If you can't scream, learn to write. If you can't walk, learn to read the road. I opened the first page. Understood nothing. But I kept it under my mattress like treasure. Because it was a door. Still shut, maybe. But a door. Rosa whispered prayers to me at night. Her own, special ones. There was no Our Father, no Amen. There were herbs, the moon, warm water, names of ancestors. She believed the women in our line knew more than they were ever taught. That inside us, there was a light that could not be blown out. One day she gave me a root. Small, twisted, bitter. She said, put it under your pillow, and you'll see what is to come. I did what she told me, and that night I dreamed of the forest, the same one where I was born. But there was no fear, no white men, only my mother. She sat by a fire and sang. Then she said, you came, you remembered who you are. I woke up in tears, but they were warm, not from pain, from something else. Time passed. People came and went. Some were sold, others buried, others taken north. No one knew what that meant. Only sometimes we heard stories. That somewhere a war raged. That freedom was being promised to the black folks. That some slaves had run and become teachers. Or even preachers. I listened to those stories like eating bread. Bit by bit. Not for the belly. For the soul. And then one evening, that same buyer came again. The one who wanted to buy Essie. This time with his daughter. She was pale like porcelain, holding a handkerchief like it could protect her from the smells. She pointed at me, said, does this one know how to braid garlands? I need one like that for the garden. I felt something freeze in my chest again. They led me aside. The master was already there with papers. Everything was decided. And then I saw Essie. She stood by the door. Small. Alone. Shoulders slumped. Lips trembling. I knew. If I left, they would break her. Rosa was already old. Mose could barely stand. She would be alone. I looked at the master and said, I'm sick. His eyebrows lifted. I went on, 3 nights with blood. My head spins. Whoever takes me will infect everyone. He drew back. You should have said so before. I lied, boldly, without shame. And for the first time in many years, I tasted victory. I wasn't sold. I was beaten. Yes, but I stayed. And Essie stayed. After that lie, after the beatings, I lay for 3 days. My back burned as if it had been branded. But I had no regrets. Sometimes pain is the price of a choice. Sometimes pain is a reminder that you're still alive. Essie brought me water, crumbs of bread, covered me. Her palms were small, but there was more tenderness in them than in the whole world. She didn't say a word, just looked at me. And I understood. She understood everything. She knew why I stayed. And that meant more than any thanks. One night she lay down next to me, placed her head on my shoulder, and whispered, "Someday I'll lie too, to save someone." And I smiled, because I knew that girl would have a soul capable of love. And that meant capable of survival. Spring brought strange news. More and more often someone whispered that the army was getting closer, that in the cities slaves were being freed, that there was a paper signed by the president. Freedom was not a word in the air, but ink on a page. But here, in our land, everything stayed the same. No one released us. No one explained anything. Only the guards grew more tense. The mistress shut the windows earlier, and in people's eyes appeared a tremble, not from fear, but from waiting. And then one morning, as we walked to work in the fields, we saw them. Men on horses, in blue uniforms. Someone shouted, "Soldiers." We froze. They pushed us forward. But it was already too late. One of the riders came closer, pulled out a sheet of paper, unrolled it, and clearly and loudly declared, "All slaves on this land are free. By law. From this day forward, you are free people." We didn't understand. We stood like trees, looked at each other, and didn't believe it. Rosa was the first to cry, then Mose, then Essie, and I simply fell to my knees, because I didn't know how to stand when the chains no longer held you. But freedom is not a door behind which the light begins. It is a road, long, painful. We didn't know where to go, where to sleep, what to eat, who we were now when there was no whip and the commands no longer came. We stayed for another week, just to understand, just to say goodbye. Then we went, each in their own direction, some to the north, some to search for kin. I took Essie by the hand and walked to the river, the very one Mose had told us about. We walked for a long time. The days blurred together, but we had a song, the one Mama sang, the one I passed to Essie. One evening we reached a town, a small one, with stone roads and houses where black folks walked without lowering their eyes. An old woman gave us shelter. She looked at us and said, "You came. That means you're alive. That means you're strong." I got work as a washerwoman. Essie started learning to read. Each letter she pronounced out loud, as if discovering a new world. Sometimes she sat on the porch and wrote her name in the dust with a stick, with pride. And I knew that was victory. Many years passed. I grew older. My hair turned gray. My body ached. But not my heart. My heart still sang. Because I lived. Because despite everything, I remained myself. And if you hear my voice now, know, I am not just a shadow from the past. I am a woman who walked through hell and didn't forget how to laugh. I am a mother who didn't give birth, but saved. I am memory, not of a slave, but of a soul.